Good evening. We are happy to have you here for our virtual town hall meeting this evening here at the Ada County Sheriff's Office. And we are super happy that you are joining us online. We wish that we could have this conversation with you in person, but we know that our priority is keeping everybody safe and healthy. And so virtually here online is the easiest way for us to connect with you this evening. I'm Andrea Dearden. I'm the Director of Communication here at the Ada County Sheriff's Office, and with me here is our Sheriff, Steve Bartlett. So happy to be able to have this conversation tonight. Why is it so important? Why is this something you wanted to do?
Well, I think that's a great question, and I'd like to echo a little bit of what you just said, why this is so important to us as Sheriff's Office. And since 2015, when I took over as Sheriff, that's been one of the things that has been critically important to me, is listening to our community, having a transparent conversation, and figuring out ways that we can be just a little bit better in the things that we do. And so when we talked about having this conversation in a public forum, obviously that was our first choice, but as a result of the COVID pandemic, I think this is the smartest way to go for us to still interact with our community and have that conversation. It's no secret, nationally and even right here in our own community, the topic of policing, the topic of how our law enforcement, sheriff's offices are interacting with our communities is high on everybody's radar. And we thought it would be critically important for us just to sit down and talk with our community members, talk with our stakeholders, our partners, and just have that conversation, exactly that. How are we doing? And are there things that we can improve on and do better for not only ourselves, our community, and those people that we're charged with taking care of?
And we talk a lot about, routinely in our organization, we talk a lot about why we do what we do, right? And really looking for those opportunities to share with the community what we do, why we do it, how we do things. So why is the community input so important to kind of our guide? How do we know and how do we use community feedback?
So number one, it's exactly who we are. It is the Ada County way, the Sheriff's Office way. It's what we build every one of our foundations on. We call it our Ada County culture. And so for us just to start with that, from day one, when somebody comes to work here at the Sheriff's Office and our onboarding process, we talk about that right up front. Being a member of the Sheriff's Office here in Ada County is a privilege. We don't take that task or job lightly, and we feel very strongly that we work for the taxpayers. We work for the citizens of Ada County. And when you talk about the constitutional responsibilities of the sheriff, number one is public safety. And in all of these conversations going on nationally right now, I think that's the big focus, is do we feel safe? Do we trust our local law enforcement? And what is our sheriff's office in this case? I can only speak for ourselves, right? We want to be accountable for who we are and how we do business locally. And so that's what we're here to talk about tonight, is making sure that our community has free access to us. Something I feel strongly about is making sure that people either in person, via email, via our Facebook or Twitter, whatever that is, if you have a question, if you want to know something more about who we are and how we do it, we want to have that conversation.
Sure. And that's exactly what we've asked folks to do. Register here, be a part of this town hall. You have the opportunity to put in questions and answers that we're going to be able to work through the evening. We'll be here and answer as many of those questions as we possibly can. And we really do expect this to be one of our ongoing conversations. It's certainly not the first community event that we've been a part of, and it certainly will not be the last. And we've talked about wanting to be able to continue these regularly. So we do invite you to please ask us questions. We did get some questions ahead of time before in anticipation of this. Some folks emailed us or sent us requests. One of the big questions is about our de-escalation efforts. Like, what do we do in order to de-escalate situations? What kind of training do we do? What's your philosophy on that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think it's the underlying theme of potentially tonight as we navigate through that. And so I talked a little bit about what an emphasis we put on for us of hiring the right people, right? I think it starts with that, making sure that we as an agency are spending our taxpayer dollars wisely upfront, of ensuring that the right people that wear a badge or have interaction under the name of the Ada County Sheriff's Office are first the right people. And so we have to start with that. All things related to policing and delivering service starts with ensuring that you have the right staff. And once you do that, I think then it translates into culture. So from day one, when a new employee starts here at our office, I sit down with them personally. We sit down and talk about who we are, what that expectation is of level of service that we require of them to deliver. And then unique to us in the Sheriff's Office is every one of our employees stands and raises their right hand and takes an oath to do a few things. Uphold the Constitution of the United States of America. Uphold the Constitution and laws of the state of Idaho. And then protect and serve and provide that high level of public safety. And so when we talk about the biases, implicit or explicit, that you talk about, I think one of our main areas that we use to provide that level of training and that level of comfort for our staff is what we call verbal defense and influence. And right out of the gate, the main principle out of that, outside of making sure that you're treating all people with respect, treating all people with kindness, is figuring out a way that we can discuss the de-escalation topic. And that's a bold topic in today's conversation, but one that we take extremely seriously here at the Sheriff's Office, one that we put great value in. And we took a stand a couple of years ago here where we felt it was so critical that we were going to have every one of our employees go through that training. And so I think across the nation, you may see a difference, right? You may see patrol units or some of our commissioned staff that drive a patrol car or carry a gun and are that forward-facing contact to the public going through some of this training. But I feel so strongly about it that we put every one of our staff members in through that training. So when you pick up the phone and dial 911, every one of our dispatchers have been through that training because really that's where de-escalation starts. When that crisis call hits and our dispatchers pick up that 911 call, they're the first line of service to our community. And so I think that's where that starts for us.
Sure. As an instructor of that verbal defense and influence class, we talk a lot about listening, right? And really understanding, using empathy to understand the people that we are interacting with. And why is that so critical in policing and in any community interaction?
Well, I think it's important in any interaction, whether you're talking about a law enforcement to citizen contact, whether you're talking a boss to employee, or any form of a relationship that you're in. Critical listening is important, because if you're not taking the time to hear what somebody is talking about, we're missing the boat. So again, we go back to that initial phone call into our dispatch center. We provide dispatch services for all of our local law enforcement, fire, and EMS here in Ada County. And so it's not just critical listening and the importance of listening for us at the Sheriff's Office, but you could be a citizen of any one of our cities in a number of needs. And I think that's important to make sure that we identify what it is that you want us to solve, whatever it is that you want us to be a part of. Listening is a critical, important part of de-escalation.
So we are going to start the questions, and we do have Julie M., who's asking, how does the ACSO actively combat racism in their training and accountability practices?
Yeah, so one of the things that we do really well here at the Sheriff's Office is investing in our employees. And in our budget process, I know that's been one of the questions that has come in from the community as well, is do we really invest in training? What does that look like for us to do? And I'm happy to say that in our last year's budget, we've invested over $500,000 into our employees to ensure that they are receiving the highest level of training, the proper training for those topics. And so when we talk about racism, I think a big part of that falls back on our verbal defense and influence class. We also have a number of classes where we bring people in from the community, whether it be a faith-based group or a cultural discussion. We try to have real conversations with our refugee community that are moving into the Boise Treasure Valley area. We want to talk about what is it that you need from your sheriff's office? How do our cultures interact with each other? And to ensure that when we show up on a call, we have set aside our personal biases, our personal beliefs, and really are there to take care of the public. Each one of our calls is extremely different. And I think that's the draw to policing, is no 2 days in this business are the same. No 2 contacts are the same. And when we talk about training, I think that's an important piece of that. Do not have your mind made up or have established what you think is going to happen until you stand in front of that client, in front of that citizen, and actively listen to figure out what the problem is. Too many times I think we in society get ahead of fixing problems for people, and when we slow it down, we're fixing a problem that didn't even exist. And so racism is that topic, is let's figure out how somebody feels, and let's then have the conversation of what role we play in helping.
I think it's also important to give some context to the diversity within the sheriff's office in terms of the functions, because a lot of people talk about policing, and as you mentioned, immediately you think about patrol, the people that you see, the deputies that you see on the street in the patrol cars. But we have the Ada County Jail. We have our civil service that interacts with members of the community, driver's license, dispatch. So we have such a wide variety of ways that we interact with the community that I think maybe the community doesn't necessarily know, and that it really isn't just limited to a patrol function, which I think is a bit unique, especially when we start talking about what it means, Pride Foundation asking about defunding the police. For us, we have statutory obligations, right, the sheriff's office. So talk about what some of those are outside of policing.
Yeah, so I'm excited to, number one, be your sheriff here in Ada County, right? I see that as an extreme privilege to serve the citizens of Ada County. As I know, the 754 other Ada County Sheriff's Office employees feel. We're made up of 5 bureaus here at the Sheriff's Office, and actually our patrol bureau is one of our smaller bureaus here. Our jail bureau that protects and takes care of our inmates population here in Ada County is our largest bureau. But we also have a court services bureau, which is an ever-growing changing group where we're taking care of our court functions, making sure that our judges and prosecutors, public defenders, and our judicial system is completely cared for. We have our Emergency Communications Bureau. Many people probably do not know that we take roughly about 400,000 calls for service into our communications center, and what those range from critical 911 calls down to people that are calling, just letting us know about neighborhood and community issues as well. And so I think that goes back to our conversation. Being the largest law enforcement agency in the state of Idaho comes with a lot of unique challenges, but it also comes with a lot of opportunity for us to ensure that we're doing it the right way, and that we're really accountable to the citizens of Ada County with not only the money that you entrust us with, but that reputation and that obligation to be accountable for service.
When you hear the term defund the police, you've talked to us about that. What do you think? What do you hear when you hear that?
Yeah, just had the opportunity today to stand in front of our patrol division and talk about that very topic. And I asked that question out loud as I've had the opportunity to speak with and meet with chiefs of police and sheriffs from around the nation and then locally here as well. And I ask our staff, what does it mean when our citizens are having that conversation, when people are showing up to City Hall or to some of our government locations and saying, defund the police? What does that actually mean? And my personal opinion is not that citizens actually want the budgets cut from our law enforcement groups, but they want accountability. To me, it says, do we trust the law enforcement agency that is statutorily obligated to provide public safety to us? Do we trust them to do the right thing with the money that we're allocating for them? That's really the question. And I've had to do some soul searching over that over the last couple of weeks and over the last couple of months. And I stand in front of you, or tonight, I sit in front of you. Normally I'm standing, but I sit here tonight saying, we have done a really good job of evaluating who we are, what the public expects of us, and I think that's why we're sitting here tonight, is we want to make sure we're hearing what the public is saying. We want to not take it for granted. We want to know how you feel. If we need to improve on things and get better, we want to do that. And so when I hear the term defund the police, I think it's exactly that. A community asking for accountability for the hard-earned tax dollars that they put forward. And I stand willing and ready to have those conversations. I remember a couple of weeks ago, we had budget deliberations here in Ada County. And we had about 10 people that called in to the budget deliberation to ask some of those questions. And never did we talk about defunding the police, but we did talk about the conversation of, should all of the county dollars that are being expended towards the sheriff's office or to community groups and Ada County groups, could we provide a better county service if we managed a few things upstream? And I remember a couple of doctors calling in that conversation, and I certainly appreciate their phone calls because they have the expertise in their field to talk about issues related to mental health. Are police officers, are our sheriff's deputies really the right staff to be dealing with mental health issues, or should we be evaluating a different way of doing that? And I remember saying that out loud in the meeting and saying, let's have that conversation, because right now, many of the jobs that fall on the shoulders and the backs of our deputies fall there because there are no other people to respond to those crises and emergencies. We are happy to be that person, but we also strongly agree that we would welcome a conversation to figure out better solutions.
Sure. To your point about accountability, Idaho Coalition asking, have you considered or would you consider having citizens involved in an advisory committee or some sort of review capacity?
Yeah, thank you for your question. I think we actively do that now. I think one of the reasons that we sit here today started over 5 years ago. And I remember you and I and a couple of our employees received some information about a potential grant that was out there, privately funded through the MacArthur Foundation. And if you remember, the grant was called the Safety and Justice Challenge. And the challenge was just that. Will you, as a law enforcement agency, will you, as a sheriff's office, put yourself out there for ultimate review to see how you're doing? Are you running your jail the right way? Do you have bias issues in your community? And so I remember we were one of 191 agencies from across the country that filled out the application and stood tall to say, take a look at us. And I'm happy to say, and we've reported this many times in many ways with our community, to let them know that we were proud to be one of 20 agencies that were selected. And as a result of being one of those 20 agencies, we came together as a community like never before. We held over 40 focus groups where we invited members of our community from all walks of life and all nationalities to come and sit in a room for years. And as a result of our citizen groups and as a result of coming together and having tough conversations about things that we're doing really well and areas that we needed to improve on, it's why we're here. It's why we put together our trainings for verbal de-escalation and influence. It's why we put together implicit bias training. And we were really on the front lines of that in our community and in our law enforcement. And I know that's the conversation that's happening nationally, where organizations and citizen groups are coming together to say, we would really like to have our law enforcement get involved in those type of discussions. And I'm happy to report that we also believe that, and we want to continue those conversations. We have a great team that works in that area, and we welcome your input and discussion, and absolutely we would love citizen input.
And we also have participated in groups, discussions, things that they're hosting, and obviously you stand ready to do that and more than willing to participate in those discussions moving forward in those events as well, because we do recognize the importance of being there and being heard in those forums. Charlene would like to know how the agency monitors disparate treatment of minority races. If that were happening, how would we know?
Yeah, thanks for your question, Charlene. And we as an organization are a data-driven agency. There is nothing that we do that we don't monitor. And so when we talk about our calls for service, right up front, every call for service that comes into our Ada County Dispatch Center is a recorded conversation that we monitor, evaluate, and make sure that the right resources are getting to that appropriate call. From there, that call goes into what we call a computer-aided dispatching center, or CAD, which also documents the call for service, which would go out to our patrol division. And from there, all of our officers will either document that call for service in comments or notes, but the vast majority of all of those calls for service are documented in a report. All of those reports are public information, and we then track all of that information. We have a group of employees that read every report, that mine those reports for information and data to make sure that that information is getting to the right area of our agency. So ultimately, the end result is that you're receiving the level of service that you expect out of the sheriff's office.
Doing the right thing for the right reason. I know that's something very important to you. Melissa W. asking, how do you feel about the issues being raised nationally about how Black people and other people of color are being treated in the criminal justice system?
Thank you, Melissa. I think that's one of the large questions that are out there, and one that we actively monitor. You know, we started out today's conversation by talking about the privileges that we as Americans get to enjoy, whether that's the Constitution of the United States or the Constitution of Idaho. And as a sheriff, we're bound to uphold those. And so the question is, how do we feel about some of the issues that are transpiring nationally? I believe that all people should be treated fairly and equally. And when that's not happening, no matter who you are, something's broken. And as the sheriff, part of my responsibility is to ensure that that's not happening here. And if you read my post earlier in the week, one of the things that I pledge to the citizens of Ada County as the sheriff, the chief executive law enforcement officer here, is that those people will never work for the Ada County Sheriff's Office. So how do I feel about it? I feel very strongly about it. I feel that if you are treating somebody differently than you would anybody else, for whatever reason, that's wrong. And that has no place in society. And I think that's open for discussion around the nation. But at the end of the day, if you are an Ada County citizen, which is what I'm pledged to take care of, my goal and hope is that no matter what race, what gender, what religious organization you belong to, when you call 911, when you call our non-emergency dispatch center, and you ask for our assistance, that each one of our staff members would treat you the same way, no matter who you are or how you came to be a citizen of Ada County.
You mentioned earlier about implicit bias training. Can you elaborate on what exactly that looks like at the Sheriff's Office?
Repeat the question.
Implicit bias. So we mentioned implicit bias, but we didn't really talk about, we talked about the verbal defense and influence. So what type of training do our folks get on implicit bias?
So very similar to our verbal defense and influence class. Our implicit bias training is one that we feel very strongly about as well, and that we have made mandatory as one of our classes that all of our employees will sit through and participate in, not only as an initial class as you become a employee of the Sheriff's Office, but we also do refresher training for all of those. And so it's no secret that we as humans have our own biases, whether that's created as a mechanism or a result of how you were raised, as a result of potentially trauma or the environment that has driven something to be in your life. And we all approach scenarios and we all approach conversation as a result of those biases that we bring. And the big conversation that we have here with our employees is, let's first recognize that we all have them. Right. If we can't have that conversation up front about who we really are, how we approach a scenario, how we represent ourselves as law enforcement deputies or officers in critical situations, I think we can't really get there to solve the problem. And so our conversation on the front end is, let's just talk about what it is. Let's talk about what a bias is, whether that's implicit or explicit. Let's just be honest up front. And so if we can first recognize that we all come to the table with our thoughts, our opinions, what we believe is right, what we believe is wrong, and then we kind of filter that through the Constitution. Mm-hmm. We filter that through the Idaho state statutes. We filter that through being a good human, just being a good person. We can deliver a great product.
And that implicit bias training we've actually taken and shared with the community, because we recognize you and I live and work and play in Ada County alongside everyone else in our community. We do not operate or live in a bubble. And so it's important to you to share that education with others as well, correct?
It is. We're happy to say that, I don't want to be too biased. However, I feel that we have really great instructors in our agency that have gone through national training, best practices and standards in this area. And yes, we have had a number of law enforcement agencies. I know we have had Boise State University. We have even had the Police Academy for the state of Idaho reach out to us and ask Ada County, can you send your employees over to our agency or over to our school to share your perspective, to share your teachings? And that makes me proud that we as an organization are a little bit ahead of the curve in some of these areas that have become such critical topics right now in the nation when it comes to law enforcement and community engagement.
Sure. Thank you very much for all the questions coming in. We're going to keep working through those as here in our virtual town hall meeting, knowing that we're going to try to put all of those together in themes and try to get these answers to you as we work through them. So we appreciate your patience and do keep those questions coming. Jeff M. asking, how do you evaluate officers? What behaviors in our employees do you prioritize?
Thank you, Jeff. Great question, because that's one of our important areas here. We were just talking about it with a fellow employee this week. We put great emphasis on evaluating our employees. From the very first day they arrive, they work here at the Sheriff's Office. 3 months and 6 months into the job, they receive direct feedback from their supervisors, and we have a program we call TrackStar, and we evaluate all employees on 9 critical areas of performance throughout the year. And So we're in the middle of that right now. Every one of our supervisors is required to sit down with our employees, talk about how they've done in those 9 areas, or 8 areas. The 9th area is actually a goal-setting section for employees where the supervisor can talk about training that they want that employee to take or gain over the next year. And so that is mandatory. Every one of our employees here at the Sheriff's Office receive direct feedback and evaluation on how they're doing throughout the year. Now, that doesn't take away from the direct supervision that we put huge emphasis on here with our employees, with our sergeants and supervisors and lieutenants. And I think one of the best ways for us to do that is reviewing on-body video, for us to review digital report writing that transpires. And then one of the things that's unique to us here at Ada County is we ask our supervisors to actually call citizens. People that have called and asked us to take a report, whether it be having their car broke into, or maybe they were the victim of a violent offense to them. We ask our supervisors to not only watch the video, read the reports, but please take the time to call that victim of that crime or citizen complaint or whatever that would be, to bypass that. Let's take it to the next level. Trust but verify, as Reagan would say, President Reagan. And I think that's how we accomplish that, is doubling back to make sure that what we believe is happening, let's verify that and make sure that our citizen base is actually receiving the level of service that we believe they're receiving. And I think that's so critical for tonight's conversation. If there's something that we need to know, if there is something that we can do better, we want to have that conversation.
We know that the training and the words are only as good as the action that we put into play, of course. Alex C. asking about outreach programs. What type of outreach programs does the Sheriff's Office have to build trust and give back to the surrounding community? Something else we're very proud of.
It is. Thank you, Alex, for the question. The programs that we're involved in, we feel very passionately about, and a lot of them are youth-based. We start on our side, we're actively involved in our Boys and Girls Clubs, whether that be our after-school programs, interacting with the children at our schools. We also are very proud of being connected to Big Brothers Big Sisters. I sit on the board of directors for that organization, and they do a phenomenal job. But how that connects directly to us as an outreach program is just this last year we've started a program called Bigs in Blue. And we have a number of littles that are in the program with Big Brothers Big Sisters that are looking for a mentor. That would eventually, one day, this makes me proud, that they would also love to be a police officer or a sheriff's deputy. And as a result of that outreach program, we are now actively selecting some of our sheriff's deputies to connect and be personal mentors, whether that be with them at a school program, whether it be to go throw a ball on the at recess, or whether it's spending time on the weekend with them. We're really proud of the upstream work that's happening with that program. If you'd like to know more about that, you can jump on our website and follow that information. But we're also very active in our Neighborhood Watch program. And we have a team of deputies that's really their area of focus, is helping to solve community-oriented issues, we talk about whether we have a neighborhood issue, whether that's a drug house in a community, whether that's a home that has a party every night and they have loud music playing at midnight, or speeders is one of our major issues. When we talk about outreach,
Sure.
probably the number one complaint that we get into the sheriff's office is traffic related. And so we have a designated team of deputies that actively work with our neighborhood watch and our neighborhood communities to solve some of those issues. We also have a crisis intervention team. I think back to 2016, I think this ties directly into this global national conversation going on right now. In 2016, as a sheriff's office, we recognized that a number of our calls for service had some mental health component to it. And so during that time, we were talking about the sheriff's deputies were the first responders to a number of these calls, whether they be a suicidal person, whether they be somebody that has mental health issues, whether somebody just wasn't taking their medication, they needed help getting to a family member's house, or getting to the hospital, or getting to a doctor's appointment. And when we did the research, we quickly identified that we had a need. And so we established a team of 2 of our deputies and pulled them out of general calls for service and placed them into our crisis intervention team so that they can have a personal connection with that section of our community that needs our help. Not everybody that is having a mental health crisis has committed a crime, but they do have a cry for help. And jail or the emergency room is not always the right choice for them. And so over the years, the last 4 years, we have worked tirelessly with our mental health community, with our hospital, with our patrol deputies, and to figure out what that next version of help looks like, or service looks like. And last year, our Ada County Commissioners approved us to add a clinical social worker to our crisis intervention team. And now we can deliver a much better product. When we talk about what is an outreach program, that's exactly what we should be doing, is figuring out what our community needs and figuring out how we can help.
Right. We also definitely connect with our business community, and this question actually comes from Micron's Diversity, Equality, and Inclusion group. They ask, what kind of on-the-job incentives are offered to deputies? For example, are there any explicit goals to raise revenue, fines and fees, tickets, and is there some incentive for deputies to do that?
Oh, I appreciate Micron being a part of our community chat this evening. Thank you for that. Absolutely not. We are a little bit different at the county. When you receive a citation in the county, those fines and fees go to court costs, to manage the courthouse, to manage our judges and those type of services. We have no incentive program whatsoever, whether that be wage-based, whether that be financial gain for our county. Obviously included in the fines are those costs and dollars that go to ensuring the system works, but it does not go towards deputies, their salaries, or to benefit the sheriff's office in any way.
Great. Let's get to one more question, then we'll take a very quick break, and then we'll come back and continue because we do have a couple of other questions waiting. So Ron M. asks, is there an effort with Treasure Valley police chiefs and sheriffs to develop uniform training and procedures that are actually practiced for handling problem situations and people? And if not, can you take the lead?
Great question. I am happy to report that locally here in Ada County, we have a monthly meeting with all of our local chiefs and sheriff, and even our prosecutor is a part of those discussions where we talk about high-level conversations. Training is one of them that we actively talk about to ensure that we're so closely knit here in Ada County. We also have Boise City, Garden City, Meridian City, and then we also have our 3 contract cities. And what I mean by that is the city of Kuna and Star and Eagle have all entrusted me, the sheriff's office employees, to provide their local policing services, which we're proud to be able to deliver to them. But yes, the answer is we come together regularly, and we also, from a Treasure Valley was the original conversation. Treasure Valley-wide is their conversation about how we can do things better. We also have a quarterly meeting where all of us as chiefs and sheriffs come together here in Ada County, Canyon County group to say, how do we reduce taxes? How do we reduce redundancy in services? And it's actually one of the conversations that I'm looking forward to having with the new Boise police chief that just started today.
That's right.
And we have had a phenomenal relationship with the last couple of Boise chiefs, and we look forward to engaging with Chief Lee about what that looks like for us as we have probably the 2 highest populations here in Ada County. And I can tell you that I'm committed to that. We have conversations about reducing those costs to the citizen. But ultimately, I think the question is, how do we ensure that in Ada County, no matter if you're in Meridian or unincorporated county, how do we ensure that the same level of service is delivered? And we are committed to that. I'm proud to say that that is one of our areas of focus here in Ada County.
Awesome. Sheriff Steve Bartlett here tonight, sharing with you, answering your questions about policing in Ada County and really the conversation across the nation. So we're so happy that you're with us. We are going to take a very quick break. We have some questions coming in about use of force policies, data-driven. We talked about being data-driven. How do you access that data? We'll talk about that. And we have some questions about fireworks, shifting gears just a little bit. So that's what we're here for, to answer those questions. We'll take a quick 5-minute break, and we will see you in just a few minutes. We hope that you'll stay with us.
Thanks.
All right, so welcome back to our virtual town hall. We so appreciate you being with us here this evening. Sheriff Steve Bartlett answering your questions about policing in Ada County and a lot of the conversations happening across the country about training. One of the main topics obviously is use of force, right? That is something that is on the top of mind for folks. And we got a question about some from Shirlene again. Does Dave Grossman's company, who trains officers across the country, do they do our use of force training here at the Sheriff's Office?
Again, Charlene, thank you so much for the question. They do not do training for us here locally at the Ada County Sheriff's Office. We're happy to report that we have some of the leading expert instructors, both from our practical side, but also from our legal side, that work directly for us here at the Sheriff's Office that do our use of force training for us. And so we take great pride in that, but we're always evaluating that to make sure that our training matches up with best practices. And so no, they do not.
When we talk about use of force, and we also talk about data, that's data that we share with our community. In fact, we have information on our website, and somebody asked, how do we access? You talk about being data driven, how do we get to see it?
Absolutely. We have as much data as you would love to look at, and we encourage our public to go to our website, adasheriff.org, adasheriff.org. It's where we keep track of reports that we call measures that matter. We want to continuously be evaluating what we do, how we do it, and does that measure up with the expectations of the public? And so I strongly encourage you to go out to our website, follow us on Facebook or Twitter. We also have an immediate email feedback email that is also on our website that we encourage our citizens to use so that we can be talking and interacting on some of these very important topics. When we talk about use of force, it's important for us to really know what we're talking about and be talking accurate data as it relates to our citizen contacts here in Ada County. And I directed our staff to pull for me just this week over the last 30 months. So let's go back and really take not just a week or a month, but let's look at the last couple of years in great depth. Let's look at the number of contacts that we're having and how does that translate into use of force.
Right.
And you can find all of that information. We're very transparent when it comes to our data. We want the public to know, but I feel it's important in light of this conversation for us to just talk specific numbers.
Right.
And we have hundreds of thousands of contacts, whether that be in our jail, in our court system, or out in the community with our citizens, with our patrol bureau. And I'm happy to tell you that our use of force numbers fall directly in line where we as a citizen base, me as the sheriff, would expect those to be. So the two most important numbers, as in our larger populations that we deal with, is let's talk about patrol first. How does that use of force number translate to every one of our citizen contacts or calls for service? And in patrol, our use of force number is 0.12% of all of our calls for service result in a use of force.
Any use of force.
Any use of force across the board. And then the next area where we have a substantial number of contacts is in our jail bureau. And even lower than in our patrol bureau is our jail numbers. And our use of force with all of our contacts and calls for service in the jail is 0.03% of all of our interactions and calls for service and contacts result in some level of use of force. We're always monitoring that. We are always evaluating, is there a better way that we can interact? Is there a different technique? Is there, like we talked about earlier, some form of a de-escalation technique or tactic that we can use to even reduce those numbers a little bit better? And I think that's why we monitor it.
Absolutely.
Right? It's why we pay attention to the data, is so that, just like I told our patrol bureau today in our block training, every citizen contact matters. And are we evaluating all of those to make sure, so that we can stand in front of you, the public, and tell you we're very proud of how we do that. But I'm also very open-minded for us to ensure that we're having that real conversation of, that did not go well, right, or we did not do that the Ada County way, right, and we need to review training, review a policy, discipline someone to ensure that the high level of service that people expect from us is maintained.
We talk about just because we can does not mean we should, right? Just because we don't have to doesn't mean we shouldn't. So really it is about that, doing the right thing for the right reason. And we know that doesn't happen by chance. So what about early warning signs, things that you do to get ahead of a potential problem or potential concern?
Right. So I think I just want to touch on, we talked a little bit about our mission, vision, values of the Sheriff's Office, and how do we monitor it, and how do we teach it, and how do we set those levels of expectation. We're really built here at the Sheriff's Office on 4 values. And I think it's important to talk about those: integrity, service, dedication, and attitude. Every one of those values that we're built on, that we show up every day to do our best to accomplish, is built on customer service. Right. And so as we navigate through that, part of that practice of evaluation, not only through the employee annual evaluation, but we also internally monitor complaints that come into our organization, whether that be a low level, hey, somebody talked to me rudely on a traffic stop, right, or even to the level that a police officer is doing something that results in misconduct or potentially a criminal act. Right. We have a very robust complaint system, evaluation system, and you talked about that early warning system. Part of our process of doing that is to make sure that we have a group of employees that work in our administrative investigative team or bureau that also evaluate each one of our use of force reports. We have our legal staff that also review contacts and use of force. And then we also have a database that allows us to monitor conduct and the frequency of which somebody may be involved in an officer complaint or a use of force, so that we can make sure that we're allowing that employee to stay healthy, so we can address poor performance. And ultimately, if that employee is just not the right fit for law enforcement career, specifically here at the Ada County Sheriff's Office, we want to make sure that we know that as quickly as we can, so that we're, again, delivering that level of service that all of you, all of our citizens expect of us each and every day.
And you mentioned complaints. Of course, we talk about feedback and really truly want to hear from members of our community, whatever way is the best way for them, right? Whatever works best, email, through Facebook, Twitter. We get input, phone calls. We certainly get input from multiple areas in Idaho Coalition asking, what type of complaint system do you have for citizens to give you feedback about an officer or maybe a practice that they're concerned about?
So we make that pretty wide.
Right.
For ultimately, we take every complaint seriously. But we want you to be able to do that in the manner or mechanism that works best for you. And for some people, that is calling our dispatch center and asking to talk to that employee supervisor. We also have a mechanism here at our administrative office that allows you to call in and file a complaint. Now, thankfully, we don't take a ton of complaints, but one thing that I want to assure the public is if you have one, we want to know about it. Most of those complaints can be handled, again, through active listening, through our supervisors having the ability to talk out loud about what was going on in that moment and giving them as much accurate information as we can. However, we also have a very formalized complaint system here at the Sheriff's Office where if you want follow-up or you want to know what the outcome of a complaint was, or if you believe that strong misconduct or a criminal offense has been done by one of our employees, you can come in and sit down and fill out a written complaint, and we will take your complaint very seriously, and we will talk out loud about how we make that right. In some instances, as a result of some citizen complaints that we didn't know about, we've been able to actively work on our training. We've been able to implement additional equipment. We've been able to afford employees classes. And then we've also gone down the road of discipline or termination as a result of a complaint because, as I talked about in our Facebook post earlier this week, we value every one of our employees. We feel like Ada County, the Sheriff's Office here, hires and retains the very best of law enforcement out there. However, equally, we also take very seriously that the level of service that they're required to provide and the professionalism of which we expect that to be done. Sometimes what we don't know, we can't correct, and so we encourage our citizens to be actively involved in that process.
And our website is another place. There is a form on our website at adasheriff.org that you can also fill out an actual form if you want to have a question or if there's a complaint, and we certainly make sure that that gets to the correct person. Jen M. asking, will you discuss recruitment plans and priorities to ensure that our agency represents greater racial and gender diversity?
Thank you, Jen. Great question, as all of these are. I feel like huge priority up front for us at the Sheriff's Office to hire and retain highly qualified personnel. We do that nationally. We have our recruiting and our HR teams that are out around our country, around our Treasure Valley on a regular basis, trying to figure out who the right person is to be a part of this agency. Nationally, it's no secret that law enforcement is not the job that it was many years ago. And across the board, we are seeing far fewer numbers of people apply to be police officers or be involved in the law enforcement field. And the stance that we've taken at Ada County is just because those numbers are fewer and a little bit lower from the recruitment side, it doesn't release us of our obligation to make sure that the right person is hired for the job. Now, we understand the demographics of Ada County and the makeup of the various races in our county. And one of the things that we do try to do in our recruitment is hire people that make up the same demographics of our county. And we are very close to that. And when we talk about those numbers, Ada County in itself is about 90 or 91% white. We are right in that number, right at 90 to 91%. We're around 8 to 9% black in Ada County, and the sheriff's office is, I believe, 7.8 or 8% as well. And then the Hispanic population here in Ada County ranges in that 8 or 9% as well. We do dip a little bit lower in that area for the sheriff's office. I believe we're in the 5 or 6% range. And so we're actively trying to hire people that meet the demand, meet the need in Ada County, whether that's a Spanish speaker or a race employee. Rest assured that we are actively doing that, but one of the things that we want to ensure is more important, or not necessarily more important than that, is making sure that the right person with the right ethics and the right morals and the right amount of kindness is hired here at the sheriff's office.
When we talk about mental health, we talk about that a lot in law enforcement because we recognize, as you mentioned, that many of the interactions we have, whether it be in the community or in our jail, involve some level of mental health care or a mental health crisis. You also feel very strongly about the mental health of our employees. You mention what you expect in terms of our employees having that same level of support and awareness about the importance of mental health.
Yeah, absolutely. Like in any business or any organization, I, the sheriff, am a huge supporter of our employees. The most valuable asset that I have is staff. And I sit here today very, very proud of the employees of the Ada County Sheriff's Office. They are the very best in this nation. And I'm happy to report that. And one of the ways that we report that and feel good about it is making sure that our employees, first of all, are healthy. You know, we've all heard the term that hurt people, or a happy, healthy employee has no other option than to deliver happy, kind service to the customers that they deliver. And so the sheriff's, when I took over as sheriff 5 years ago, matter of fact, yesterday was our 5-year anniversary. We established 3 priorities that we as an organization and agency follow. And number 1, in no particular order, is happy and healthy employees. How do we do that? How do we ensure happy, healthy employees? Well, first of all, again, it comes down to hiring the right people, making sure that they are mentally and psychologically and physically fit to be in that happy state. But to answer your question, we took it on ourselves a couple of years ago to make sure that all of our employees that fall into that commissioned area or that are in a high risk of crisis intervention, dispatchers, our crime lab, our detective unit, all have the ability to once a year go and sit down and talk to a mental health professional. I think it's critical. And it was a hurdle for a couple of years when we sat down with some of our staff and said, I want you to be your best self. I want you to be happy when you come to work. Right. You play a part in that. When we started establishing physical standards and mental health standards, I think we took great leaps and bounds in our organization to deliver a better product. And just as we say, happy people deliver a much better product. A number 2 priority is creating a safe, healthy work environment here at work, so that when employees come to work, they have the ability to think freely and integrate their thoughts and processes into delivering the solution. We put great value on our supervisory training to make sure that our supervisors know how to create a safe environment so that they can in turn deliver that product. And then priority number 3 is providing the highest level of service to our stakeholders, our partners, and each other. And I think that's a critical piece as well, that sometimes that gets out of whack in any organization, whether that marrying up and finding that real balance between customer service and internal satisfaction and accountability.
So certainly none of these conversations began last year, right? These conversations in the community have been happening for a really long time, but the killing of George Floyd was a huge pivotal point in terms of some of these topics becoming absolutely at the forefront. So the word chokehold, we've heard that. And so Steve M asks, what is our policy on that? And how do we use levels of force like that?
Yeah, thanks for your question, Steve. We as an organization have never been a part of a chokehold. And when we talk about that, this tragic event of Mr. Floyd, as you say, has brought this to the forefront. And it's why training and refreshers and an obligation to ensure that our policies match our practices is so vital. So when we talk about a chokehold in that term, most people are talking about a mechanism or a technique that restricts the airflow to somebody.
Right.
Never has been, never will be a technique that we use at the Ada County Sheriff's Office. Now, we do use a technique that's called a neck restraint. Right. That is trained on each year, that each one of our employees, in order to effectively and legally use, must go through the process of knowing what that feels like and how it impacts somebody's body. And when we talk about that, that's really a huge difference, is restricting airflow to restricting blood flow. And when we actively discuss policies, our Ada County policy uses this technique when we are defending or protecting the life of our officer or the life or serious bodily injury of one of our citizens that we are compelled to protect by the Constitution. And so we evaluate that every day. We train on it. We have biannual training from our in-house counsel to talk about use of force issues and how they apply. And I think that's critical. It is not just one class and then you're done. I think a unique conversation to this is last year when we were discussing this topic, not just a couple of weeks ago. Obviously, this scenario has driven it, but I made it optional and mandatory for some of them, but every one of our command staff members that work for the sheriff's office, we asked them to go to a 40-hour class where we talked about this exact topic. Every one of us as commanding staff for the sheriff's office went through that process and know exactly what it is, what you're allowed to do, and what you're not allowed to do. And I think that's the critical component to that.
And you touched on use of force numbers earlier. So let's add a little bit of context to that neck restraint. This is not something that is used frequently. When you talk about that extreme risk and that safety of life, protection of life, that's a responsibility. You spoke to that earlier this week in your message to the community about that. Mm-hmm. So these are not common practices, fortunately.
They are not, and I think one of the areas that we talk about with our measures that matter and our data information, so just like we talked about our percentages, right? Less than 1%, 0.12% of our patrol interactions result in a use of force of various techniques. During that same time period that we evaluated and put together at the sheriff's office here, we have only used a neck restraint 31 times during that same period of time. And out of those 31 usages of the neck restraint, 0 medical or physical injuries resulted as a use of that neck restraint. We talk very openly. It's no different than the use of force continuum and conversation that we engage in. A use of force is used to gain compliance in that situation. However, the immediate second that force is granted and complied with, that technique is to be ceased. And I think that's what you will see as our community, as we engage in this conversation further. But as you go out to our website, again, adasheriff.org, and look at our measures that matter, look at our force data. It's online so that our community knows exactly what we're doing. And I think those numbers speak to that conversation, that, you know, neck restraints for the sheriff's office, if we just want to talk numbers, when we talk about use of force, are 0.12% of our interactions. A neck restraint is 0.0021% of our interactions, and I think that's important to add to the dialogue as we navigate through this very, very important conversation.
Sure. And I also think that the George Floyd situation, another big piece of that really brought to the conversation about ethical intervention, right, is perhaps the other officers, those folks who are standing nearby that know something isn't right. We teach that in the verbal defense and influence class. What is your expectation? I know it is mentioned in the 8 Can't Wait, which you addressed earlier this week as well, but what is your expectation of every single employee?
Well, the bottom line is that every employee does the right thing. And that when we talk about that intervention piece, it is as important as the use of force. If we have an employee that is engaged in what we call calls for service, high adrenaline calls for service, whether that be a vehicle pursuit or some type of a physical altercation, just like you would be if you were exercising or running on a treadmill. physiologically changes how you think. It changes your blood flow. It changes your motor skills and everything else that you are doing to achieve your ultimate goal. My expectation is that, number one, all employees use the appropriate level of force. I expect my officers to protect themselves, keep themselves safe, keep the community safe, and in doing that, that's where that intervention comes in. If we, as an employee of the Sheriff's Office, feel that one of our employees is too close to the scenario or is too physically engaged or mentally engaged, my obligation is to intervene and help out my fellow deputy, help out my fellow citizen, and ultimately have the right thing happen.
So a little bit of a change of pace here. Sandy P wants to know about fireworks sales and setting off fireworks for the 4th of July holiday, one of our busiest nights of the year, certainly into our emergency communications center, as folks are calling to offer those, concerns about fireworks being put off, with so many of the city firework displays being canceled because of the COVID-19 concern. I think some communities are worried about neighbors setting off fireworks. What's your advice to them, or your thoughts on that?
Well, happy early 4th of July, Independence Day. We want everybody, first of all, to be safe. And we want everybody to have a chance to enjoy their families and just enjoy Ada County. It's why we all live here. The mountains and the waterways and everything else that goes along with the benefits of being an Ada County resident. Mm-hmm. But specifically to this question, there are areas in Ada County that are absolutely off limits for aerial fireworks. You should not be allowed to purchase those in Ada County. We have established ordinances through our commissioners and through our city councils to put that to rest. The only fireworks display that I'm aware of that is happening in Ada County is in the city of Star. Mm-hmm. They are having a fireworks display, I believe, around 9:30, 10 o'clock on July 4th. I'm sure Mayor Chadwick would love to have our Ada County citizens enjoy his city, but we need to do it safely. We cannot forget that we're in phase 3 and that we need to ensure that we are managing our social distancing properly. Remember the 6-foot, 10-minute rule that has been coached and taught to us over the last few months by our Central Health District. And then it's super important that a lot of our people remember to respect other people's space, and when you can and when appropriate, try to wear a mask. And I'll get back around to answering your fireworks question as I discuss that. But if people feel that fireworks are being set off that are a danger to their community, they can always call our Ada County Dispatch Center. That number is 377-6790, 208 area code. And we would be happy to route that call for service to the appropriate law enforcement agency, keeping in mind that it is one of our busiest nights for service. And some of those calls for service may be taken by city jurisdictions as area information. Obviously, we want to get there as quickly as we can. And so we would ask the citizens, please don't set off illegal fireworks in Ada County. It causes extreme heartache for our fire departments. They are busier that evening than all get out. And we really want to reserve our emergency services, police, fire, and EMS for those true emergencies and get them to the people that need our help.
Mario P. asking, will the Sheriff's Office enforce a facial covering mandate?
Will we enforce? Marshall, great question. At this point, I'm unaware that we do have a facial covering mandate. And I think that's one of those important conversations I think that we're all having right now. Not only with the health district, but with all of our city and county elected officials, we're talking about how do we keep Ada County a little bit safer? And one of the ways that is proven that we can reduce this pandemic and try to get Ada County back into phase 4 and try to get us back into some form of normalcy for us living is wearing a mask. And we've asked our staff to wear masks. We've asked our staff that if you're in somebody's personal space for an extended amount of time, if you're going out and about, try to do the right thing. The mandate question is, we're not there, but we are certainly asking people to appropriately social distance and try to do the right thing for Ada County. And we're seeing unprecedented numbers here in Ada County. Just this week, several of our days, over 300 new cases each and every day. We understand that other areas of the state are not seeing those numbers, but this is where we live. This is our home, and we want to do the very best we can to protect that. We're going to do most of our enforcement. When he talks about enforcement, we're trying to get as much education as we can out there. We're making contact with our businesses. We're making contact with those areas that may have more than 50 people in one gathering, just so we can do our part to keep those numbers low.
And certainly working with Central District Health, obviously one of our main concerns is keeping our jail safe and taking every precaution we can to ensure that we keep those in our care safe and healthy as well. And so that's something we've been watching, and certainly something we've talked about since the COVID-19 pandemic information was out there. So we are right at the 7:30 mark, and so we talked about going for about an hour and a half here. What are your final thoughts? We've said this is the first of what we hope to be many conversations, whether it's in this format or in person, because we do hope to be there soon. That's another reason for facial covering so that we can get to a town hall meeting in person soon. But what are your final thoughts this evening?
Well, I first of all want to say thank you to all of you that have joined us tonight for this critical, important conversation for us in Ada County. I think back to the last couple of years, we talk about town hall meetings, but one of the favorite things that I've had the opportunity to do, which is we call stroll with the sheriff. We come out to your community and we go for a walk and we sit down or stand up and we just have this great conversation with not only our mayor of that community, our law enforcement comes, and we just have a great chance to talk about what's important to them. And so my message is exactly that. We're here to listen. We want to hear from you. We've on our site, if you go to, again, Ada County, adasheriff.org, on our website, you will find our Facebook, our Twitter, go to ACSO feedback at adacounty.id.gov. That's a mechanism that we can interact via email with. But I certainly look forward to getting back and getting in front of the community. And until then, we're doing the best that we can with our virtual town hall meeting. I want to give a huge shout out to our IT department that has worked tirelessly with us here at the Sheriff's Office to make it possible for us to do this. First of all, we would have never had the ability to do that. And so I just want to say a big thank you to them. Send us your questions.
Right.
Let's figure out what that next conversation looks like. Just this week in the community, I had an opportunity to meet with several of our community groups that all said, how do we get connected to this? How can we join in the conversation next time? And we look forward to that. It would make it much easier if we can be in a hall or be in a larger room so that we can all talk in person. And so let's be safe. As we go into this July 4th weekend, we want to interact with you, but we want to do it in the safest manner possible. So.
And share this. We will keep this video. We'll have that on YouTube, which will be available. So share it with members of your community, people that you feel should hear this. And then if you share those questions with us, we will start planning our next session and deciding what that looks like. And we'll certainly keep people connected through our website, our blog, and also through our social media channels. So we very much appreciate your participation tonight, and we look forward to continuing the discussion very, very soon. Have a good rest of your evening.
Thanks all.